An obese mail-order bride showed up in tears. The cowboy looked at her. That's all I ever wanted. Wyoming Territory. Summer, 1888. The midday sun scorched the cracked platform of the tiny rail stop just outside Larkspur Hollow. Dust curled in the heat like breath from an unseen beast, coiling around wagon wheels and boot heels. The train screeched to a halt, and from the third passenger car stepped a woman who filled the doorway with quiet force. Mary Lou Grant stood tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark coat one size too tight across the chest. Her boots hit the platform with purpose. In one hand she clutched a dented suitcase. In the other, a small brass trophy, worn from handling, caught the sunlight. For bravery in public service. Mary Lou Grant, Kansas, 1887. Behind her, a young railroad worker leaned out of the ticket booth, elbowing a colleague beside him. "That's her," he whispered. "The fat woman who stopped a train." His companion snorted. "Damn thing probably stopped itself, just bounced off her." Laughter. Low, half-hearted. "Enough." Mary Lou kept walking, head high. Her steps were measured, but her jaw clenched. She had learned long ago how to walk through laughter, through rumors, through the kind of eyes that saw only weight and not worth. She did not stop, did not look at them. But as she passed beneath the iron awning, something warm slipped down her cheek. A single tear. It was not weakness. It was not shame. It was for herself. For the moment that day, months ago, when she had thrown her body between iron and flame to stop a runaway engine. For the screams she still heard in her sleep. For the ache in her shoulders that never left. For the silence that followed once the newspapers found a new hero. And for the child she had once been, wishing someone would look at her and see more than size. She wiped the tear away without slowing. The cart waiting at the end of the platform was old and sun-bleached, tied to a mule that looked half asleep. Its driver, a leathery man in a sweat-stained hat, tipped his chin toward her. "You Mary Lou Grant?" She nodded once. "Hop in. Mr. Beckett sent me." Mary Lou climbed up beside him, suitcase in one hand, trophy tucked tight against her side. The cart creaked under her weight. She glanced sideways. "He did not come himself?" The man Carl shrugged. "Not one for crowds, that one. Gets around all right, but he don't see much anymore." "Blind?" "Been that way near 5 years. Powder charge accident." She nodded slowly. "So he has never seen me?" "No, ma'am. Said he heard the article read to him at church. Said, 'Your name's stuck.' Told me to fetch the woman brave enough to stop a train." Mary Lou's fingers tightened on the trophy. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not yet. Something quieter. She looked out at the road. The sky stretched forever here. Dust trailed behind them as the mule stepped forward. A man who had never seen her face, had read her name, not her body, not her figure, just her name, and still wanted her. The sun beat down. Her throat felt tight, but her spine remained straight. Because sometimes a woman only cries once and keeps the rest inside for the long ride ahead. The cart rattled up a narrow trail flanked by cottonwoods and scrub pine. After a twist in the road, the land opened into a clearing of dry grass and low hills. Nestled against a ridge stood a modest homestead, weathered, sturdy, a leaning barn, patched fencing, and beyond it a dozen horses grazing quietly. Mary Lou adjusted her coat as the cart slowed. "This is it," Carl muttered. "He's usually by the west fence." She stepped down, boots landing with a soft thud. The wind carried dust, hay, and something faintly metallic. From the barn's shadow, a man emerged, tall, lean, sleeves rolled. His steps were confident, though his gaze never rose. His eyes, gray and clouded, did not see her, yet he moved straight toward her. He stopped 3 paces away, touched the brim of his hat. "Your voice carries," he said, "like someone who's used to speaking into the wind." Mary Lou stiffened. "And yours sounds like you talk mostly to yourself." A pause, then a faint smile. "I suppose that's true." He tilted his head slightly, as if studying her through sound. "You must be Mary Lou Grant." I am. I'm Thatcher Beckett. I figured. They stood in silence. A horse snorted in the distance. A windmill creaked. Come inside, he said. It's cooler. I have tea if that suits you. Mary Lou hesitated, then followed him. The cabin was simple but tidy. Shelves lined with tins, a stove still warm. On the table, 2 cups, a tin of honey, a folded napkin. Without asking, Thatcher pulled a chair out for her. He moved with the precision of memory, not sight, his hand brushing the table, counting 2 steps to the chair. He sat across from her, reaching for the teapot. He poured without spilling. You've done that before, she said. Most days, yes. She folded her hands in her lap. Then, quietly, You wrote me a letter. I did. Why? His hand rested on the pot's handle. I heard about a woman who threw herself in front of a train to stop it, and I thought, who does that? Who gives themselves like that, expecting nothing in return? Mary Lou glanced at the brass trophy in her satchel. You could have written anyone. No, I don't want someone soft or waiting to be rescued. He leaned forward slightly. I want someone who knows what life costs. She studied his face, the lines, the faint scar near his temple, the weariness. You wanted someone broken? I wanted someone brave. He said it plainly. Without flinching, Mary Lou swallowed. You know I'm not exactly what people expect. I can't see what people expect, he replied. Only what I hear, and I hear steel in your voice. Silence stretched again. Then Mary Lou stood. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Beckett. His expression didn't shift. Neither am I. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. You invited me here to marry you? And if I say no? I'll drive you back to town. But not before you've had supper. You've come a long way. She stood still. The light from the window touched her face. Then she turned back slowly and sat. I'll have that tea now. Mary Lou worked in silence. Each morning, she rose before the sun crested the ridge and fed the horses, her thick hands moving with practiced ease. She fixed a sagging fence by the west pasture, pulled splinters from old boards, hammered nails with a rhythm that echoed across the valley. She did not speak, unless spoken to. Thatcher rarely did. He seemed content in his quiet world, feeling the breeze to know the weather, listening to the hooves of his horses to guess their mood. At night he sat on the porch with a blanket over his knees, sipping tea while Mary Lou washed the dishes inside. On the 3rd day, a wagon rolled into the yard. 2 men from the nearby town came to trade oats and tobacco. They shook Thatcher's hand, laughed too loudly, and stared too long at Mary Lou. One of them, wiry and sharp-faced, nudged the other with his elbow. Is that her? He asked in a whisper that carried. The other snorted. Guess so. Big as a freight cart. Thatcher tilted his head toward the sound. She can hear you, gentlemen. They stiffened but said nothing more. As they turned back toward the wagon, one muttered, He must have picked her 'cause he can't see her. Mary Lou said nothing. She kept her hands busy sorting supplies, but her jaw ached from how tightly she clenched it. That evening she took the long way back from the barn, her boots crunching slow across the dirt. The moon was rising, pale and full, bathing the house in silver. She paused when she heard voices, Thatcher and someone else, speaking on the porch. She stepped around the side of the house, unseen in the shadows near the lilac bush. A low voice spoke first. So, that's her, huh? Her name's Mary Lou, Thatcher answered evenly. You sure about this, Thatch? The voice had a southern drawl, frank, she realized. I mean, she's big, man, like big, built like a damn water barrel. A pause, a long one, then Thatcher said quietly, I do not know what she looks like. Frank laughed awkwardly. I know that. But come on, you could have written any gal. Why her? Because when she walks, Thatcher said, I hear the weight of someone who has carried others, not just herself. You know what that sounds like? Frank didn't answer. It's not about soft steps or pretty shoes, Thatcher continued. It's the kind of footfall that says, I will stand between you and the worst of the world. That's the sound she makes. Mary Lou's throat tightened. She stepped back too fast and her boot snapped a twig underfoot. She froze. Who's there? Thatcher called, rising halfway from his chair. Mary Lou stepped into the moonlight, arms crossed. It's just me, she said flatly. Frank tipped his hat. Evenin', ma'am. She didn't look at him. I'll go check the trough. Mary Lou? Thatcher started, but she was already walking. Inside the barn, she slammed the door behind her. The air smelled of hay and sweat and something hot boiling beneath her ribs. She gripped the edge of the feed barrel until her knuckles ached. He had not chosen her for love. He had chosen her like someone chooses a draft horse, strong, reliable, unpretty, unseen. The echo of his voice, I do not know what she looks like, rattled in her skull. She was not a symbol. She was not a footstep. She was a woman. And she had not come all this way to be pitied, praised, or painted like some noble creature he could never touch. The morning was still dark when Mary Lou packed her things. She moved quietly, careful not to wake the horses or creak the floorboards. The brass trophy was the first thing she placed in her satchel, wrapping it in an old scarf. She did not cry. Not this time. Not anymore. By the time the sun cracked the horizon in a pale orange line, she was already at the barn, cinching the saddle onto Thatcher's strongest mare. Her jaw was set. Her coat was damp from mist. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Thatcher stood in the threshold, hands resting on either side of the doorway, as if to measure the stillness of the world. I heard you moving, he said quietly. Horses are restless too. Mary Lou tightened the strap, not turning. I'm leaving. A pause. His voice stayed calm, even. Do you think you're only worthy of someone's gratitude? She froze, her hand still on the leather. I think, she said, I'm tired of being worshipped from a distance. Tired of being chosen because I make people feel safe. She turned then, her voice sharper. You picked me like a damn parable, Thatcher, not a person. He didn't flinch. I picked you, he said, because you jumped in front of death without asking why, and I hoped, maybe, you'd do the same for love. Mary Lou stared at him, her chest tight, the sting rising in her throat, but she said nothing. She climbed onto the horse, tugged the brim of her hat low, and rode. The sky grew darker than it should have. Clouds rolled over the ridge, fast and hard. Within minutes, the wind had turned sharp, and the first drops of rain began to fall like warnings. Mary Lou pushed the mare into a trot. The animal, unsettled by the shift in weather, tossed its head and whinnied. Thunder cracked behind them. The path turned slick. She veered down toward the creek, hoping to cut across before the storm swelled the water. A sudden burst of lightning split the sky, white and jagged. The mare reared. Mary Lou shouted, pulled the reins hard, but it was too late. Her boots slipped from the stirrup and she tumbled sideways, landing hard on the embankment. Her shoulder struck a rock. Pain shot through her ribs. The world spun. The horse bolted. She lay still, rain pounding her face, her breath shallow, far off. Too far, she thought she heard a voice calling her name. Thatcher had felt the storm building long before it arrived. The smell of it in the air, the tremble in the porch wood, the silence from the barn. When Mary Lou did not return, he found the mare's tracks in the mud. He could not see them, but he knew the rhythm of hoofbeats on wet soil, knew how the sound changed when panic set in. He took his herding stick and headed into the storm. Each step was measured. He counted them, listened. The wind screamed past his ears. Water ran in rivulets down his collar. He paused near a bend in the trail, held his breath, and heard something. Not the wind, not the rain. A cough, a gasp. He turned toward it, stepped carefully down the slope, letting the stick tap ahead of him. Mary Lou? Nothing. He moved again, slower. A breath, a rustle. Then his stick struck something soft. He knelt. His hand reached forward and touched fabric. A wet sleeve. An arm. She stirred, weakly. Damn it, he breathed. Hold on. He hooked his arms beneath her and lifted. The rain fell harder now. blurring everything but her weight in his arms. She was heavy, yes, but familiar, like carrying firewood that still held warmth. He stumbled once, but kept going, water sloshing in his boots, breath rasping. When they reached the porch, he nearly collapsed. But he did not let go. Inside, he laid her down, gently, on the rug, by the hearth. Her face was pale, eyes barely open. "Why did you come?" she whispered. He brushed a wet strand of hair from her forehead with trembling fingers. "Because," he said, voice shaking, "I do not need eyes to know when someone's worth holding on to." A month passed like a slow-burning wick. The frost lifted from the mornings, the wind softened. For the first time, laughter returned to the hollow. Mary Lou was no longer a stranger in the house. She moved through it like she belonged, not because anyone gave her permission, but because her hands had already shaped it. She repaired the creaking floorboard, rebuilt the gate, and planted sweetgrass by the windows, because the scent reminded her of home. Thatcher watched her, not with his eyes, but with attention. Each morning she led him outside, guiding his hand to new leaves or a budding branch. She'd press a wildflower to his nose and ask, "What do you smell?" He'd answer, "Sun on dirt," or "the color yellow," if it had a voice. She once ran his hand over cottonwood bark. "Feel that?" she asked. "Rough," he murmured, "but full of lines, like a life that's been written." She grinned. "Close. It means spring came late." Their silence grew easier. One night, after supper, she read from an old dime novel. He laughed at the hero's terrible dialogue, and she nearly dropped the book. That same evening, he took her hand before bed. "Thank you for teaching me the world again," he said. She wanted to speak, but the lump in her throat held her silent. The fire started past midnight. Lightning ripped through the hills. Thunder shook the window panes. Marilee sat up, heart pounding. She smelled smoke before she saw it, sharp and thick, crawling under the door. She threw off the blanket, ran to the window, and saw the glow, orange and furious, rising from the barn. "The horses!" she gasped. She was out the door before the next thunderclap, barefoot, coat over her nightdress, hair unbound. The barn was engulfed. She heard them, terrified whinnies, hooves pounding. She didn't wait. She ran into the fire. The first stall came easy. The old mare recognized her voice and bolted outside. The second took longer. A young stallion, panicked. Mary Lou grabbed his halter and pulled, shouting over the roar. He resisted. She yanked again. "Move!" He surged forward, nearly trampling her. She ducked just in time. The beam above cracked. Then came Jasper, big, proud, stubborn, trapped behind a fallen beam. Marilou braced her shoulder and pushed. Her muscles screamed. The smoke blinded her. She coughed, staggered, tried again. "Come on, you damn beautiful beast," she growled. It shifted. Just enough, Jasper bolted through, brushing past her, and the beam crashed down. Pain tore through her shoulder. She screamed. Thatcher had woken at the smell. Then came her scream. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his stick, navigated the porch by memory, and followed the scent and sound. Heat licked his skin as he neared the barn. "Mary Lou," he shouted. A cough, left side. He moved toward it. His stick hit something, soft, heavy. He dropped to his knees. "Mary Lou, speak to me!" A wheeze. "Over here." His hands found her, sweat-soaked, half-pinned beneath a scorched beam. "Hold still," he said, voice shaking. He shifted the beam just enough to slide her out. She cried out. He pulled her close, feeling the heat of her skin, the tremble in her limbs. Then he began to see her, not with eyes, with hands. He brushed ash from her forehead, fingers trailing down her cheek, over a scar. The freckled dip of her chin, the soft swell of her cheekbone. His hand paused over her lips, then moved to her shoulder, then her arm, calloused, strong, bruised. His thumb traced a burn. She winced. "Ugly, huh?" He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "I feel scars, and calluses, But what runs under them isn't damage. It's courage. You carry it like blood. Mary Lou's breath hitched. He placed his hand over her heart. It beats hard, he whispered, like it's made of wild thunder. She couldn't speak. She didn't need to. He pulled her closer as rain soaked them both, flames crackling behind. The world narrowed to skin, breath, and the miracle of still being alive. And for the first time, Mary Lou didn't feel like someone built for storms. She felt like someone worth being saved. The morning after the fire, the world was strangely still. No wind, no birdsong, only the soft creak of wood cooling after a night of flame. Smoke lingered over the blackened barn like a memory that refused to leave. Inside the cabin, Mary Lou lay on the cot near the hearth, shoulder bandaged, arm in a sling. Her hair was still damp from the rain, and the smell of soot clung to her skin. Pain pulsed beneath every breath, but she did not complain. Across the room, Thatcher moved with quiet intent. He stoked the fire with gentle hands, stirred the pot of broth over the stove, then returned to her side with a tin cup. He knelt, holding it steady near her lips. "It's hot," he said, "but it will help." She took a sip. The taste was simple: onion, bone, and a hint of pepper. It warmed her throat, settled in her chest, like something familiar. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "You taught me how." She gave a faint smile. "I thought you were not listening." "I always listen," he replied. "It is the only way I see." She rested her head back against the pillow. "You saved me," she murmured. He reached for the cloth beside him, wrung it out, and gently pressed it to her forehead. "I just followed the sound of your heartbeat," he said. The silence after that was soft, safe. She closed her eyes for a long while, letting the warmth seep in. When she opened them again, she stared at the ceiling. Rough wood, a single crack running like a fault line. "I have not told you much about before," she said quietly. Thatcher folded the cloth, placed it back in the bowl. "You do not have to." "I want to." He waited. "I was raised by a father who drank and a mother who hated mirrors. Neither of them ever said I was pretty. By the time I was 12, I believed them." Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered. "I worked in a slaughterhouse at 15. Hauled carcasses twice my size. Got so strong the boys stopped teasing me and started fearing me." She looked away. "They used to call me the man in a dress. At first it hurt. Then I stopped wearing dresses." Thatcher's fingers twitched on his knee. "How long did you work there?" 7 years. Until I pulled a boy out of a runaway chute. Lost my job that day. Why? Because I broke his arm doing it. And because people do not like women who look like me telling men what to do." He didn't reply. She stared at the fire, the flicker of orange reflected in her tired eyes. "After the train thing," she continued, "I thought maybe people would see me different, that maybe, finally. I was something more than just the big woman with the strong back, but they just gave me a trophy and sent me home." She turned to him now, voice lower. "You're the first person who ever made me feel like I'm not a mistake." Thatcher sat beside the cot, quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "If you are a man, Mary Lou, then men should learn gentleness from you." She blinked, stunned. He reached slowly, cautiously, and took her uninjured hand in his. "Because you are strength without cruelty, fire without smoke. You are every kind of beautiful I know how to feel." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat tightened. Then, without warning, her face crumpled, and a sob broke loose. Not a loud one, not desperate, but old, deep, from a place far back and long buried. She turned her face to the wall, trying to hide it, but Thatcher didn't let go of her hand. He simply held it, warm and steady, while the tears came. She cried for the years she had been invisible, for the names she had swallowed, for the skin she had learned to armor. And when the storm passed, when her chest finally stilled, she looked at him. "No one has ever said that to me," she whispered. "I have never said it to anyone," he replied. They stayed there, in the glow of the fire, in a room now filled with something new. Something quiet and kind and shining. It was not pity, not need. It was recognition. And for the first time in her life, Mary Lou did not feel like she had to shrink to be loved. She felt seen. The grass swayed like an ocean beneath the setting sun. Thatcher walked with purpose, one hand trailing along a taut rope tied loosely around his wrist, Mary Lou holding the other end. He knew the path by heart, every dip, every root, every soft patch of earth. She did not guide him so much as accompany him. His boots moved with memory, his head tilted to the wind like a man who still knew how to read the world. They stepped through a narrow gate into a wide field where the wild flowers bowed to the evening breeze. The sky was painted in bands of gold and rose, with streaks of purple just starting to bleed in. He stopped. "Here," he said. Mary Lou looked around. The view was breathtaking. Rolling plains, the old fence line in the distance, the hills lit like fire. Thatcher turned toward her, his clouded eyes fixed on the sound of her breath. "I wanted you to see this place," he said, "even if I cannot." She stepped closer, gently pressing her hand against his chest. "You didn't bring me here just for the view, did you?" He exhaled, slow, steady. "No," he said. "I brought you here to ask you something I've never asked anyone." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver ring, rough around the edges, clearly hand-forged. On its surface, tiny letters were carefully etched in raised relief. "I had it made by a blacksmith who lost 3 fingers in the war," he said. "He knows how to craft with what's left." He held the ring out between them. "Mary Lou Grant," Thatcher said, voice low, trembling slightly. "If you want me, I will wear your name like a prayer and call it home. I cannot promise you sight or fortune or easy years." He stepped closer. The air was warm between them. "But I can promise you this. I will never fear the world again if you are beside me." She looked down at the ring, then at his face. The sun caught the edge of his jaw. He stood so still, as if holding his breath. "What does it say?" she whispered. He reached for her hand and placed the ring in her palm. "Run your fingers across it." She did. Her fingertips traced the tiny ridges of each letter. It read, "Light is not in the eyes, but in the courage of the heart." Her throat closed. Tears burned, but she blinked them back. "You want to marry me?" she asked. "I already do," he said. "Every time you walk into a room, every time you breathe and remind me, I am not alone." She swallowed. "You haven't even seen me." "I have," he said softly. "In every word you've spoken, in the way you carry pain, in how you stand up even when the world would rather you shrink." She laughed, a shaky, quiet sound, and pressed the ring to her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "God, yes." The wedding came 3 days later. The barn was still blackened, but the field had never looked brighter. Mary Lou stood at the edge of the pasture in a white dress she had sewn by hand, simple, strong, and beautiful. It fit her perfectly, not just in size but in soul. Her hair was braided back with strands of wild sage and blue cornflowers. Her face was bare, unhidden. She sat atop the same mare that had once thrown her near the creek, but now the animal stood steady as stone beneath her. In her left hand she held the reins, in her right she held Thatcher's. He stood beside her, head high, dressed in his best coat, his eyes unseeing but bright with calm. They walked, man and bride, into the open field where the villagers had gathered. The same villagers who once whispered now stood quiet. No smirks, no laughter, only a hush. And then, one by one, hats were removed, hands went to hearts, eyes shimmered. Because they were witnessing something rare, not a love story built on beauty or luck, but one carved from fire, from grit, from the raw and defiant belief that everyone, no matter their shape or scars, deserved to be chosen. And as Mary Lou lifted her face to the sky, wind tugging gently at her veil, she did not feel like a miracle. She felt like a bride. The years passed gently in Larkspur Hollow. The land healed. A new white barn stood where the old one had burned, its wide doors flung open for children to race through. The fields echoed not with silence, but laughter and thundering hooves. 3 springs after their wedding, Mary Lou and Thatcher opened the Hollow Light Riding School. It was modest, just a few horses, a worn corral, a lean-to for saddles, but it welcomed every orphan, wanderer, and lost soul the territory sent their way. No one paid in dollars. They paid in work, in stories, in shared silence. Mary Lou taught the children how to ride, how to fall without fear, how to rise again. Thatcher taught them how to listen, to the wind, the earth, and the hearts of animals. How to speak without raising your voice. How to lead with gentleness. Each evening, they gathered around a low fire behind the cabin. After bowls of stew, Thatcher would begin. There once was a woman who threw herself in front of a train. He never said her name, but every child knew. Mary Lou would sit beside him, her hand in his, the weight of her past quietly resting in her chest. She still bore the scars on her shoulder, still walked with a slight limp in winter, but she moved with certainty now. She belonged. One autumn, a woman from the Western Ladies' Gazette came through town, searching for real stories, stories with grit, not just grace. Mary Lou wrote her first article that winter. She drafted it late one night at the table by the fire, long after the house had gone still. Her handwriting was clear, her voice even clearer. I was not born soft. I was not raised to be looked at. I was built to carry, to hold, to endure. For a long time, I thought that meant I didn't deserve beauty. But now I know. We don't need to be someone's muse. We only need someone who sees our soul and chooses it. She signed it. M. Beckett. The article spread fast, clipped and mailed across counties. Women read it by lamplight, wiping hands on aprons, tears rising without warning. Letters poured in, from women who'd been called too big, too loud, too different, women who had forgotten how to dream. Mary Lou answered each one, not with advice, but with belief. One frosty morning as the fire cracked low, Mary Lou stood beside their bedroom door, holding 2 things, a small weathered trophy and a silver ring. She hung them on the cedar wall above the writing tack. Yet, Sadie and Mary Lou never seemed, or even felt. Side by side, the brass still read, "For bravery and public service, Mary Lou Grant, 1887. And beside it, the ring caught the light, its raised letters clear. Light is not in the eyes, but in the courage of the heart. She stepped back, arms folded. 2 symbols. 2 victories. One for choosing to live, one for being loved. Outside, the sounds of morning rose, children laughing, boots thudding, horses calling. Thatcher stepped into the room behind her, sensing the stillness. "You picked a good spot," he said. She smiled. "They're the 2 things I never thought I'd have." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "But you earned 'em both," he whispered. They stood quietly as the sun rose over the land they had claimed together. And out there, the train still ran. The mountains still stood, the prairie still breathed beneath the wind. But in a small cabin at the end of a winding trail, a woman, once forged in fire, now stood beside a man who had never needed eyes to see her. And that kind of love was always worth telling stories about. If you're still sitting quietly, heart heavy and eyes stinging from the story of Mary Lou and Thatcher, you're not alone. Because true love doesn't need eyes to see. It only needs a heart brave enough to reach for another's soul. This was the story of a woman once told she was too much, too big, too strong, too different. But in the end, she found a man who didn't ask her to change, he just asked her to stay. If you believe in love that defies judgment, outlasts storms, and rises from the ashes stronger than before,